influential text in Eastern and arguably Western monasticism, considering its impact on Ambrose and Augustine. The appearance of visions in this life was an allegorisation of the ascetic struggles of the monk Anthony. The text was translated into Latin soon after its composition, shortly after Anthony's death, and the translator was a certain Evagrius, presbyter of Antioch, possibly the man who later became Bishop of Antioch. The monk's temptations took visual form as fearful demons and monsters, or angelic apparitions. And the life of Antony was a forerunner, really, for the sayings of the Desert Fathers, the Abategmata Patrum, which began life as an oral tradition of the Antiquity monks of Palestine, Syria and Egypt, and was recorded first in Greek and Syriac in the 6th century. It consists of words of spiritual direction from the fathers and occasionally the mothers. Is there many people here who've read the Abategmata? Yeah, good, so you know exactly what it is. It's words of spiritual direction from these people to their disciples. And there was a Latin translation made in the 6th century, possibly by the Pelagius, who later became Pope Pelagius. In the desert eremitism of Egypt, victory over demons was seen to have a cosmic effect, not just a personal. This is illustrated by the Vito Patrum story, so that's the Latin translation of the Abategmata, about a demon who spent 40 years trying to cause a monk in the desert to fall. When he finally succeeded, the devil praised him far more than those who had taken a fraction of the time to corrupt less holy men. The first Desert Fathers may have been emulating a sect of Jewish ascetics known as the Therapeutae, who populated the Egyptian desert in the vicinity of Alexandria in the time of Philo of Alexandria. How many people here have heard of the Therapeutae? Oh, good. Well, I didn't know very much about them at all, but what we do know comes from Philo's text on the contemplative life, De Vita Contemplativa, whose authorship by Philo is accepted by most people but has been questioned by some. The Therapeutae are described as inhabiting many places, among them Lake Mareotis near Alexandria. You'll get the point of all this in a moment. What I'm trying to show is that there was a distinctive allegorical interpretation or approach to dreams by people from and around Alexandria, and it was pre-Christian. So we may be able to trace it back to the Therapeutae, but we can certainly trace it back to their contemporary Philo of Alexandria, who of course was Jewish. The Therapeutae's ascetic practices, which were undertaken 6 days a week, included solitary prayers, fasting and the study of scriptures in their isolated cells, each with its separate holy sanctuary and enclosed courtyard, having renounced private property. For they read the holy scriptures and draw out in thought and allegory their ancestral philosophy, since they regard the literal meanings as symbols of an inner and hidden nature revealing itself in covert ideas. This rather suggests, to me at least, that they would have had the same attitude to interpreting visions seen in dreams as reflecting an underlying spiritual reality, in the same way as they interpreted scriptures allegorically. Joan Taylor and Mark Edwards have recently traced the allegorising tendencies of Alexandrian philosophers from Heraclitus, who wrote allegories on Homer, onwards, and especially Philo and Origen. If they were open to allegorical interpretations of literature, including Homer and scripture, why not also dreams? This does suggest that there was a distinctively Alexandrian school of dream interpretation. In the same way as scriptures were interpreted allegorically by those in the Origenist tradition, Eastern monastic writers treated dreams as reflecting an underlying spiritual reality. Evagrius treated dreams with suspicion, since dreams could be sent by the devil to tempt the monk away from the true path. For Evagrius and his student Cassian, dreams were a good diagnostic of the state of the soul and could be sinful in themselves. By the early 7th century, John Moschus used them as narrative vehicles for divine discrimination between Orthodox and heterodox, in the context of the rivalry between churches loyal to the anti-Chalcedonian Severus of Antioch in East Syria and the Orthodox Chalcedonian Church of Constantinople. In his spiritual meadow, divine punishment was meted out to heretics in dreams that foretold what would happen to them at the final judgment. This represents a great leap, whether backwards or forwards is open to debate, in the conception of the role of dreams in governing or measuring others' spiritual health. The Eastern Syriac tradition continued to practice the Wagner suspicion of dreams as vehicles for temptation into the 8th century and beyond. They were allegorical in that they were indicative of an underlying spiritual reality. This, I submit, is an Alexandrian hermeneutic that can be traced back at least as far as Philo and Origen, if not to the first ascetic movement in Egypt, the Jewish therapeutic.
So, for Synesius, the virtues are necessary for turning away from the attractions of matter. And by that we might understand that the possession of virtues clears the way for one to attain vision of the divine. While the virtuous person may not achieve their end necessarily of successfully gazing upon the divine, they may be assured at least that the virtues will steer them away from evil. So the virtues are prerequisites then for preparing oneself to be elevated towards intellect. So in the first instance, we can say that union with the divine demands the turning from the body and from all that's corporal. And that's where the virtues help. And in the second place, we can say that the union of the divine demands returning through the intelligence towards God. So the virtues, according to Synesius, purify by casting off or rejecting that which is foreign to them. This must be so, for as Plato wrote in Phaedo, and Synesius quotes verbatim, it is not permitted to the impure to join with the pure. Virtues don't, however, fling the soul directly into contact with the divine. Such an idea is impossible for Synesius, as the soul occupies a middle position between the divine, which is purely good, and matter, which is evil. So virtue then drives the soul from evil, washes it of all stains received through this contact with matter, and then re-establishes it in its medium position. And this middle position, very interestingly, Synesius later relates to the part that Icarus failed to keep to. It'd be interesting to develop that analogy further. So in his work Dion, which is essentially on Padian, Synesius clearly acknowledges that the perfect life, tesseristes zoes, is fleeting due to the perishable nature of the human body. Furthermore, he plainly states that he is a man and not a god, and that he is thereby unable by his very nature to remain constantly in a state of contemplation, that state which he clearly believes is the best. At the same time, while he's unable to remain in that perfect state, his preferred state, he's adamant that he's not a wild beast either, such that he has to revel in the delights of the body. So the Greek way of life, exalted by Synesius in Dion, as a rational and ordered interaction with matter, doesn't bring the person quickly into union with the divine. Rather, it makes the less vigorous progress, reanimating and rewarming the divine within each person. This moderate view of spiritual progress shows a remarkable insight into the human condition, I believe, as it extols the patient acquisition of virtue over more radical, ritually coercive means. And we find his account of the spiritual progress of the Hellene most clearly stated here in Dion 9.1. He writes, the philosopher of our country, however, considers the middle way with more attention than the barbarian. So he has prepared for himself in effect a way, and he ascends it by degrees so that he acts as himself. When he progresses, there are some chances that he will encounter somewhere the object of his desire. And if he does not encounter it, oh well. He finds himself further along the road, and this is not at all lacking in importance. On the contrary, he could well be by this differentiated more from men of the community than these men are from the beasts of the field. So the Greek way of life is founded first and foremost on the acquisition of virtues, which are the first of the degrees which elevate us towards the intelligence, enabling the Hellene to remain on the middle path. The key reasons why Synesius proposes the acquisition of virtues in order to interpret one's own dreams more accurately, I can summarise in these 4 ways. First of all, the virtues impel the soul towards the via media, directing its attention away from matter and towards the intellect. Second, prepared by literature and other propedeutic tools, the individual develops the ability to reason discursively, which is crucial for drawing out the meaning of one's dreams. The content of one's dreams recorded for posterity in a dream journal may now be examined with some success, as the virtuous dreamer is better formed to examine the composition of this autobiographical literature. Third, the purification of the imagination through virtuous living allows for more perfect communication of data from the external world to the rational soul. As the imagination contains the imprints of the forms of that which is becoming and communicates these to the rational soul, the purification of the imagination is intimately linked to the epistemological exercise. Fourth and finally then, virtuous living purifies the imaginative pneuma, thus enabling the pneuma to fill the brain cavity, making it impossible for demons to enter therein and avoids nightmares. So Synesius shows himself as a true Hellene then, holding virtue and the virtuous life in great esteem. He promotes literature as a propedeutic to philosophy, and he deems the philosophical life to be the best means for attaining vision of the divine. We find also that he adopts and slightly adapts the central anthropological tenets of Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, and the Neoplatonists. And finally, he assumes the cosmology and ontology of the Neoplatonists. And so on these Greek foundations, Synesius constructs a framework on which to hang his theory of dream divination. Shortly, our modern scientific perspectives on personhood, cosmology, education theory and teleology, and our Christian beliefs on salvation and demonology diminish the practical value of Synesius' work. But nevertheless, Synesius offers us a glimpse of a world in which mystery had not yet lost its ability to enthrall and captivate, hope was sought from beyond the veil, and virtue was a thing esteemed. And I think we could do well to recapture some of this.
In his letter on sickness and health, St. Athanasius presented sleep as a natural occurrence and a necessary time of rest for body and soul. He actually believed that only a well-rested person could maintain balance and spiritual watchfulness. The latter point shows how much interconnected were in his mind human nature and the spiritual life. Immediately relevant is that the Athanasian stances on sickness and health point to a realistic appraisal of human nature. It is undoubtedly this realism, well, let's call it incarnational, which prompted the Alexandrian to acknowledge the full humanity of Christ, despite the risks entailed by this approach during the Arian crisis. It is truism to insist that the antagonists of Nicaea twisted the kenotic status of the Logos incarnate into a proof against the Lord's genuine deity, divinity. More precisely, St. Athanasius maintained that insofar as the Lord was truly God incarnate, he experienced all that pertains to human nature, namely being hungry, thirsty and weary, and not knowing, and sleeping, and weeping. This passage, repeatedly discussed and paraphrased by scholars in relation to Christ's humanity, shows that in principle, and in context in which he focused on the human nature and its physiological traits, our Holy Father displayed an optimistic view of sleep. The same positive understanding transpires at times, albeit indirectly, in his ascetic theology, where St. Athanasius endeavored again to secure the wholeness of human nature and sleep as integral to it. About positive statements on sleeping, these physiological phenomena were still too much associated with the weaknesses of the human being's animal side. It is not noteworthy that, not unrelated to the example given above with St. Anthony's coma, St. Athanasius often used sleep imagery, more precisely the expression falling asleep, as a euphemism for death. Actually, for the Greek speakers here, that's pretty obvious. I mean, the connection between being asleep and being dead. And for instance, the word that we have in English and many other modern languages, cemetery, means in Greek dormitory. Place where one gets rest, as in sleeping. Pastorally motivated substitute, the association of sleep and death is telling. An even more pessimistic assessment of sleep features in the saint's ascetic writings. Here, sleep and other physiological features appear to St. Athanasius and his favorite monastic paradigm, St. Anthony, as shameful aspects of the human experience. For instance, when he thought of the noetic character of the soul, St. Anthony would be rather ashamed about eating, sleeping, and other necessities of the body. This shame prompted St. Anthony, as we shall see below, to both practice and recommend sleeplessness, an aspect that strangely was praised by St. Athanasius. In exalting the hermit's ascetic achievements, it seems that St. Athanasius did not realize how antithetical this was to his own positive views of sleep, discussed above. The contradiction dissipates, however, when one thinks of the Alexandrian's profound conviction that nature had to be ascetically remolded and spiritually transformed, as pointed out by Oliver Peterson. Thus, whereas he acknowledged the naturality of sleep, ultimately St. Athanasius believed that this physiological feature pertained to the human being's present state, not its glorious destination. So far we have seen that St. Athanasius perceived sleep as a natural occurrence, part and parcel of being human, even though this very physiological phenomenon was not representative of the higher state of being to which humankind is called. We have learned so far that in line with his sleep theory, St. Athanasius exhibited both positive and negative appraisals of dreaming, and that ultimately what mattered to him was the status of the dreamers, with holy men and women being seen as privileged recipients of divine messages by way of dreams. Nevertheless, we reached an impasse in relation to the experience of the saints during sleep. Did St. Athanasius take those experiences as dreams or as visions? In order to answer this question, a more detailed investigation is in order, which we should focus on Against the Gentiles, chapters 30 to 35. I can just disclose this understanding that I have so far about those chapters, which are very important for, let's say, dream theory in St. Athanasius. There are a few categories that should be distinguished, not dissociated, not separated, but distinguished in those chapters. There is, of course, the mere dream, and it is discussed there. There's also that faculty of imagination. It is very difficult to pinpoint in those chapters to what St. Athanasius refers. Is it mere dreams, or is it this imaginative faculty which cannot be reduced to dreaming? And it's not imagination as we would call it today in modern terms. Imagination is capacity to represent things. Yeah? And then there's this mystical or spiritual perception, divine perception, which is a different story altogether. So there's dream, there's imagination, there's this mystical perception, divine perception of things. And I'm afraid that at least in the scholarly analysis that I stumbled on so far, these distinctions are not